Hello, and welcome to this episode of Art Stuff, which isn't really an episode of Art Stuff at all. So I just finished this painting I've been working on quite a while, and I figured to spice things up a little bit, I'd make an overview video and make it a little bit of like a private video for the people who decided to support me. So chances are you've shared this on Facebook or something like that, or you're a subscriber of my YouTube channel and you've been given this link. So thank you very much for the support, and we're just going to be doing a chronological kind of overview thing using the layers of the painting. So I'm going to start right away. Let's get into it. First things first is I did some sketches in my sketchbook. Actually no, the first thing I did was I made up the idea, I guess. So I got into the Silmarillion, so the Lord of the Rings, Silmarillion book. Sorry, the Tolkien Silmarillion book, which is the same setting as Lord of the Rings, if you're not familiar. And I got really fascinated by the idea of Glaurung the dragon, who is nicknamed the Father of Dragons, and it's a wingless drake. It's a really cool concept, and I fell in love with it. I wanted to depict it somehow. It wasn't really going to be a serious illustration at first, but this is how sometimes it goes. Sometimes I start with a sketch and it gets out of hand, and that's usually where the cool stuff comes from. So first thing I did was I did some sketches for what I would think a really old badass Father of Dragons would look like in my sketchbook. And then the next thing I did was I traced it. I traced the good ones at least. I put the paper on my Wacom tablet. I made sure my tablet settings are proportionate to my screen settings, and I just traced it using my pen. So I don't have a scanner, so that's an easy way to do that if you don't know that. And then I just gave it some basic airbrushy values, and that's basically my first reference. And I showed this to people, asked them, which one do you prefer, and literally all of them said this guy. So that was pretty easy, to decide which one I was going to pick. I preferred this guy, and absolutely everyone I asked also preferred that guy. For the sketches though, what I did was I looked at actual lizards, because there's something about Glaurung the dragon that is, special. He's more like just a really big lizard, which is what a dragon kind of is, but he doesn't have any wings. He's very normal, I guess, in terms of, dragons goes. He looks a lot more like a lizard than the average dragon, or what you would imagine at least. And I was kind of getting sick of the typical dragon, the whole cliche dragon. I wanted to redesign it a bit, because it's not a real thing, and you can redesign it, doesn't matter. So I've been trying to get a little bit fresh with that idea, I guess. So I did take some photos I searched some photos of a sand lizard or a desert lizard is what it's called, and some other ones, and based my drawings off of that. I was looking for foldy and spiky and saggy skin to represent oldness, I guess. He had to look badass, obviously, and evil, kind of. And this is what I kind of started with as far as a sketch. And then the next thing I did was I wanted to design the dragon. This isn't the final design, so I took it into 3D. And I did a sculpt. It's a really rough sculpt. I used ZBrush and using the Dynamesh stuff and all that kind of amazing new features of ZBrush, if you're familiar with that. I made a basic sculpt of the entire dragon. And this is pretty much, I was pretty content with this design. I started with the sketch that you saw, and then I kind of moved on to designing other elements of it, trying lots of different things, but that's because that's what ZBrush is really good at. You can really shift and deform, and it doesn't really matter. And I also added, some tusks, some extra spikes, and a body, basically. And overall, I'm pretty content with it at this point. It looks like a dragon, kind of, but it's special, it's unique, I guess, and I think I kind of try to feel it, I guess, and to me it felt like Glaurung. So what I did was I moved on to posing it. So if I load the subtool, here we go. You can see I just posed it by using the deformation tools in ZBrush, and it's pretty, it looks pretty weird from this angle, for example, because all this detail is missing anyway. I knew I was going to do the front kind of like sort of like this, and from then on I just took a screenshot, gave it some basic lighting and made sure I got the perspective roughly correct, and started in Photoshop. So this is the first layer. This was the render I took, and yeah, that's what it looks like basically. So it's a good base, and the reason I do this mostly is because of the design phase. It's so much easier to design this thing and to play with the angles and stuff like that when you do it in 3D. So learning ZBrush is a really big advantage when you're doing illustrations. You can see I tried to draw the evil guy in the Silmarillion, so Morgoth. The idea was to have Glaurung and him in a piece, and he's like being commanded, he's like the leader of the dragons, and he made him and stuff like that. And I thought it'd be super badass if it was like the two main, like the main bad guy and then this awesome dragon in the piece. So I started with that. I did a really basic sketch of a character. Designing him was really tough because of, he's a special character, and I didn't want him to look like Sauron from the movies or anything like that. So designing that was a little bit of an issue, but I tried, I guess, and I just didn't like it, to be honest. So I started painting him out, and he just didn't really strike my fancy, if you will. So I added some colors, as you can see here, basic stuff, just with some layer modes, and then just painting on top. And at this point, I remember really struggling with Morgoth, the character. I just don't like it. I mean, it's not painted well, but also the design is really lame. The pose is really weird. I didn't like it at all in general. So what I did was I just removed him, and I changed. I remember changing. The original file name was called Morgoth and Glaurung, and then the new file name of this piece was Morgoth Dies. So it's actually still called that. So the final piece, the title of the file name is Morgoth Dies 6 or something like that. And I just deleted him, and I wanted to do something else. So I was gonna paint just a dragon, but then I decided to expand the canvas a little bit. As you can see, here we're adding a little bit more room. At this point, I had decided to paint an army, and the reason for this is because I heard or read, or I don't remember exactly, but I got to know about the fact that dragons in that time in Middle Earth actually were commanders. They're intelligent beings, and they were commanders of armies. So Glaurung had an orc host, and there was something about that was just so badass that I had to paint it. So it's like this dragon who actually has an army of orcs. Holy shit, that's so cool. So I wanted to depict that. I wanted him to be badass while his army marches to some kind of battle or something, and that's basically what I started painting, just because it was so cool. So here we go. That's the basic layout for the piece. I decided on this because of composition stuff. Him being in this kind of corner right here is pretty good compositionally speaking. He silhouettes quite well against the low horizon, compared to him at least, and I quite like it for a setup like this. So, and I added a little bit of like a storm thing in the background. I took this off of a picture, so I started looking at a picture, and it was a specific storm formation, and I thought it would be pretty cool, but in the end it didn't really translate so well, so it's going to disappear in a few layers here. So let me just readjust this layer. Apparently it's not correct. There we go. That's approximately right. So I started to paint out the army characters. So one thing about this piece is it's gonna need lots of orcs and lots of army dudes, and of course a couple of trolls and all that. And I also like the whole warg rider, because there's a lot of wolves back in that time in the Silmarillion. So it seems logical that there would be some warg riders, I think. I'm not entirely sure. This isn't supposed to be like a like a historical thing. Like I didn't take every single bit of detail off of the books that I could. I don't care so much for being absolutely correct to the original works. So it's kind of my twist. I mean, I don't think there were red orcs, for example. So but whatever, you know. And I started to just draw out these orcs individually, just sketching them out, adding some basic color, and setting them out in the composition. So one thing that's wrong in this composition right now is, and you'll see that getting fixed, is it's a good idea to catch yourself doing this before you get too far into a piece, is notice how every single orc is like singled out, and they're almost all like a similar distance from each other. For example, this orc is that far from that one, that far. This is a little bit of overlap, but not really insanely. You know, there's a little bit of gap there, gap there, gap there. There's a gap here, and almost all of them are like, you know, just like that. And it doesn't look real. There's no depth. I'm trying to, you know, it's almost like a flat, you know, depiction of all these different characters. Because I'm afraid of painting, because a human being is afraid of painting over something they've already established. And that's kind of something to look out for. I do this a lot. It's a common, like, brain stuff. You know, you want to space out things evenly. A good example is, you know, people in a train station are going to all stand, you know, if it's a crowded train station, they're all going to align nicely in a sort of grid, and each person has about the same distance between each other, and we do this subconsciously. And it also occurs in paintings. It doesn't have to be characters even, like even trees and stuff like that, and other elements of a painting. So I kind of realized that, and I think I fixed it in a few layers. So here I'm just painting this out. I'm adding a foreground character because I noticed that it's a little off in the depth part of things. So you can see there's a little bit of foreground dude right there that I add, but it's not really enough. Other than that, not much change there. And here we go. So I just basically came back to it like a day later and realized, whoa, something is really not good about this. First off, everything is really small. Even the dragon is small. And there's no depth at all. Nothing overlaps almost. That's just not very good. And then I do this. So I basically took this guy, scaled him way up. I scaled up the dragon. I scaled up the troll, and then put all these different characters a little more over on top of each other, like so. And here I'm doing this even more. So I did this, and then it's still like, okay, it's better, but you know, I still want more depth. So I'm doing this then. I put these two orcs a little bit closer to the camera still, and I think I even scale up this guy a little bit. And it's starting to look pretty, you know, a lot better in depth. So if we compare this, you know, there's this, and then it's the same elements, but just rearranged versus the camera. And you can see, you know, the dragon takes up a lot more space, a lot more real estate on the piece. The most interesting characters take up more real estate. It just makes sense. It feels a lot more depthy, and like so. I started painting this out, and you know, the first thing is, you know, you can see it's pretty rough up until I get the composition that I kind of want. So then I start to paint out things like this face on the troll here. You can see once I'm content with where it is, I can start to actually paint out these guys. So these guys get a little bit more personality. I'm starting to get into actually, you know, adding texture and stuff like that, facial expressions, whatnot. So there we go. And here I'm just starting to add stuff. So a little bit of painting out these rocks. A few more characters here and there, another warg rider, because there's a little, like, this is still very empty, the background is very empty. I'm trying to convey like mass. I'm trying to convey an army, which is numbers, you know, quantity, but there's not really like a lot of stuff in the background, which is what you would expect if it's in an army. So I'm adding more characters here and there. And in every single phase of this, like I remember specifically at this phase, I was pretty, like, I was stuck for quite a while at this phase. And what I do is I ask people every single step of the way, like, what do you think? Because you get kind of sick of your own painting, and you have to take breaks, and you get like attached to stuff that doesn't really work that well. So each phase I asked, what do you think? And a lot of people were pointing out that this guy right here with the flag was weird. Just because he's like facing the other way, everyone's looking that way. Then there's this random dude with a flag, and it's like, you know, the background is all the same color basically, the floor, I mean. And people were also saying the clouds look weird. This little, this yellow bit doesn't make any sense, because if you think about it, this is basically saying like there's a light source there, but if you look at the guy, there's actually shadows like that, so it means the light source is actually like this. So this doesn't make any sense. The lighting on the clouds in general doesn't really make any sense. So, you know, this couldn't be dark if there's light coming from, you know, approximately this way, you know, doesn't make any sense. So I decided to do some major changes, and that's basically what's going on here. So I repainted the sky entirely for this one, for this layer. Not much else changes other than a little bit of fog here and there. So I just masked out the sky and started trying things. I think I painted like 2 or 3, and then finally got to something a lot nicer in my opinion. It just, I don't know, it's sometimes you have to do this. I mean, the sky had been bugging me for a long time, and I just got sick of it, and I decided to just delete it completely and start over. So that's something that you have to be able to do. I can repeat that a lot in many videos, because it's really important to be able to not get too attached, I guess. And we can move on to the next steps. So as you can see, this stuff is starting to really like get painted out. So all these characters are starting to look fairly presentable. If we zoom in, you know, like this guy is pretty small in the painting, but he's already roughly defined. This guy's face is pretty much done, other than, you know, details. But the structure is there, the lighting is there, and I'm fairly like the hard stuff is almost done. You know, the tough decisions and the tough painting steps are almost done, especially with these clouds now in that I'm most content about. It gets a lot easier from now on. So some color correction, you can see I make it a lot warmer, but then I actually made it a lot colder too, because I don't want it to be there's, you know, it's Mordor, I guess, and it's like evil, and I don't want it to be like nice and warm and stuff. So I did some color correction there. I made it from green to like a bluish, purplish undertone, as you can see, and I think it works better because this green is kind of nasty, and the bluish is a lot more fitting compared to, you know, if you take into account the sky and stuff like that. So I did mostly color adjustments to fit the new sky, and from then on it's just painting out. Well, actually, there's another major change. So people were complaining about that guy, so I decided to, someone told me, I don't remember who, maybe you should just put him on the background, you know, it's small, I guess, so he's not like an object, you know, that really blocks the composition. And I did that, so that was a great idea, and I ended up doing that, put him way in the back, and then filled up the remaining gaps right there. So this needs a lot of orcs, so I just added more stuff. You can see me changing a little lighting and stuff as well, obviously, but not too much. And then here we go, lots of orcs join the army. So basically background stuff right here, all these sketches, and then over here to really try to create that depth. So there we go. I also seem to have painted this guy, so or changed this guy. So if you look at the eye, it looks kind of like a human eye. It's kind of weird. So I changed it to be a lot more like orcish and vicious and threatening, hostile, stuff like that. A little bit of detail here on the eyes as well, a little bit of the fur. That's pretty much it for that layer. So it changes a lot because of the, you know, the mass and the depth is a huge deal when you look at this. Suddenly, you know, it's empty, there's not really, it's an army, but, you know, it's more like a group, I guess, a band, and the background you kind of implicates that it ends there, you know, there's not actually a huge army. But just doing this adds like it gets rid of the border, you know. It could go on for miles, for all you know, as the viewer, and that changes a lot. So it's important to, if you want to convey depth and you want to convey quantity, make sure it vanishes. You don't see any borders, you don't see where it ends, and then the viewer is just gonna like, you know, fill in the gaps almost. And from here on, I'm pretty content with the overall piece, all the colors, all the composition elements, and all the characters. I'm all okay with it. And then I started rendering. So what I do is when I render is when I set up a grid, and then I just take every single grid one at a time and start rendering out the contents of that grid, and it makes it a lot easier. I keep track of where I've rendered, so you can see I would zoom in into this little square and then start smoothing out a little bit of this stuff, and so you don't have those weird edges and unfinished things, and I start to render out. So I can actually show you probably. So here's an unrendered piece of that painting, and then there's a rendered piece. So back and forth. You can see it's just a detail pass. There's not much going on in terms of like thought process. It's just zooming in and painting out a lot of stuff. I also actually did, scales and stuff. This was a really pain in the ass, but I did this all by hand, almost all of it by hand, and it just had to happen. So I think it really adds a lot to the realism of the character of the dragon. So that's what happened. So if we do the final here it is. So the final piece right there. I think I should be able to get it right like that, a little bit more into the camera view. So yeah, that's pretty much it. So final render. This is basically the difference between rendering and not rendering. So you can see, fog and smoothness where it belongs, and it's funny how this last step, this to this, actually took the longest almost. It's very boring and it takes a long time, and it only really adds a little bit, to your painting. So almost nothing changes here. There we go. Now you can see it. So almost nothing changes, but I don't know. It kicks it up a notch to the next level, and it's kind of necessary because else it just looks raw and rough and unfinished if you don't do that. So that's it. This is the overview video. I hope you enjoyed, and again, thank you for sharing if you've watched the entire thing. Props to you. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for the support in general. I really appreciate it. It's a big deal to me. And yeah, so be sure to subscribe if you haven't. If you've come from Facebook and you really like these kind of videos, I do a lot more like these. I do overview videos of every major illustration I make, and I have my art stuff series on the side. So if you are interested in like painting videos, this is pretty much the place to be. So hit that subscribe button. Hit like on YouTube if you want to share support even more, but pretty much you've already done more than I can ask for. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you hopefully in the next video.